see all of these kinds of debates. If there was a group, a Marxist group that had a very clear plan, a clear program outlined, it would be the Socialist Party. Among the members of the Socialist Party were economists, writers, other intellects who who argued that Haiti needed to kind of move past the color conflict that it had, and also felt that very strongly that an opportunity presented itself in 1946 that could not be wasted. That if the new politicians that emerged on the scene kind of went back to this old form of politics, the recognition of what Haiti's role is and issues of imperialism and so forth, and Haiti's connection to the United States would be lost. And so they fought very strongly about that, and that comes out in the stuff they did. But the intensity of that competition really kind of puts a great deal of strain on these movements. What Estimé tries to do when he comes to power in August is to create a cabinet that brings Marxists as well as people like Fignolé, who is a labor leader, into his cabinet with a new group of black politicians, but they barely last any time. And the infighting and the factions among these different groups. It's difficult when you're dealing with a culture where that's already there, and you're trying to erase that, but it's still a hangover that exists.
Sorry, I can't make, but I'd like to ask you, did those political parties, the communists, the socialists, while they were part of this intellectual elite, did they have the capacity for governance? I mean, I know that in our experience, for example, as a community in exile, there were a lot of these groups emerged, the Maoists, the Trotskyists, but there was a lot of talk and a lot of intellectual, stuff, but there was little capacity. There was real understanding of what it takes to run a country and what it takes to really engage the masses beyond Port-au-Prince.
Yeah, I think that was a problem that cuts across all of these groups, not just the communists, but also Fignolé, to a certain degree, even suffered from that in spite of his great popularity. That's very true. The question of capacity to actually incorporate or kind of forge a new type of governance is a big question. And they had a lot that they're up against too. I mean, they argued, they would have programs where they say this is how it should be done, but you still had the Haitian army, which is very strong. You still had other people who now had a space for political power, not necessarily radical, even very conservative, conventional politicians who didn't want to relinquish that space for other groups. And then, of course, the climate, the regional climate that they're dealing with is very intense. So the capacity question is something that is very crucial. Definitely in the 1930s they didn't. None of the groups, even the labor groups, didn't have any strength to do so. There was a possibility after 1946 to do so, and a little bit of promise, a glimmer of it in 1957. But by then, the other elements came in too strong to be realized.
Richard Rodriguez. I'm part of, I was at Clay teaching, yes, I'm part of FIU teaching American history class with Dr. Bernard and a number of fellow students here. You mentioned a little bit about Firmin and what he did as he was leaving and heading towards St. Thomas. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what were some of his concerns as he was leaving Haiti and what was really agitating and bothering him about the nation as he left to go to St. Thomas.
Yeah, Firmin is a very interesting character. He, extremely brilliant man and writer. Also very much a political thinker, who in some ways was ahead of his time in terms of the ideas that he wanted to implement and realize in Haiti. He really kind of locked horns with some very powerful people that were against him in Haiti. And despite his popularity, he did gain a certain degree of popularity. What's interesting about Firmin is that he's still able, outside of Haiti, during his first period in exile. He goes into exile at least 3 times. Just to give you a brief background, his history as his emergence on the scene dates from the period of the 1870s. He's a liberal, a member of the Liberal Party in Haiti, comes to power as a minister of Haiti after the overthrow of President Salomon, and then is instrumental in diplomatic relations between Haiti and the United States, but eventually leaves Haiti and goes into exile. But his ideas are seen as very progressive among groups of intellectuals and potential political leaders in Haiti. And so while he's in exile, those in Haiti, as well as those also in exile, begin to forge a group, a party around Firmin, right? And that party's main agenda is to somehow break this pattern, this rule by powerful generals, and to kind of put Firmin in as someone who would help kind of combat that. That's the one thing. The second thing, of course, is there's increasing foreign interest in Haiti during this period, and Firmin is seen as someone who could also be, show that Haitian politics is not as disruptive as people think, and also by being there would kind of not allow for the argument that they need foreigners to come in, they need the United States to come in to show them how to govern. And so Firmin wins a great deal of support. In St. Thomas, where a great colony of Haitians had settled during this period. St. Thomas, I don't know how many here know, but that's one of the places long before South Florida, and where Haitians would go for exile during that period. So was Jamaica. A lot of Haitians would go there, and there are a lot of Firminists who had settled in Jamaica, and they're extremely supportive of him. So this is what's one of these things. It sounds like a tragic story, doesn't it? That here's someone who everyone invests hope in, and never really realizes it's similar to Daniel Fignolé in the next century, and then it ends or it collapses that way. But in many ways, though, the ideas that he does introduce are very crucial ideas and very important. And as I said, these are ideas that gain a great deal of support beyond Haiti and Haitians.
My name is Brian Paul, I'm a student at FIU. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on Daniel Fignolé. It seems that everyone expected him to remain as president, although in your book as being provisional president.
Yes.
If you could tell a little bit more about the circumstances surrounding his election.
Sure. Well, by way of prelude, Fignolé, of course, was incredibly popular. He had an interesting background. He was a teacher, a mathematics teacher. Had a great command of Creole, right, and was able to use that command of Creole to gain a great following. He also understood very well what was happening on the ground in Haiti. He was a very grassroots-oriented type of person. But at the same time, he was someone who was from this black middle class, right? Someone who was educated, someone who had a degree of space in the social hierarchy as a result of that. And someone who also believed very strongly in the Noirist ideas, which is why people like Duvalier, who was supportive of him, and Laurent Denis, who was also, who wrote articles with Fignolé, supported him and helped in the creation of his party. That popularity grows and grows and grows during this period. There are moments where it's suppressed by the governments in power. Because of the chaotic situation in 1957 during that election, when it was very clear that Fignolé had a great deal of support, there are several contending people who were vying for political power. Fignolé felt, when things really reached a crucial point, that when they offered him the opportunity to be provisional president, that was in some ways the end. His acceptance of it was the end. Because in many ways, if he kind of held out and actually waited till the elections were held, he probably would have been voted in as president of Haiti. But his acceptance of it was premature. He felt, and this was against the Constitution, the new Constitution that had been written shortly before this election, that he could remain in power, but he couldn't. The provisional presidents were not allowed to do so under the Constitution. He thought that the chaos of the period would facilitate that. And, it was a trap. The trap was set for him. He fell into the trap, and that was what happened.
As a follow-up to that, would you say that he shared Duvalier's anti-democratic ideas?
That's a tricky question. I would say no. From the research I've done and from people I've talked to who were close to Fignolé in his party, and were very close to what he did, said he was very, very incorporative of people's ideas, and it doesn't really seem he would do that. In fact, in the campaign, he criticized Duvalier heavily for that, because he said he worked with him. He knows that Duvalier could be capable of this, but his own views, it's like the question on Firmin. These guys never had a chance to really show us, what they would do. But based on his life, based on what he wrote, because Fignolé wrote a great deal in his newspapers, based on his ideas, he supported democracy. Right? He supported that as being important. And he reached out to the United States a great deal too. Fignolé would make sure that whatever move he made would be one that wouldn't be antagonistic to the United States, which was good on his part, but it wasn't read that way across the Caribbean basin. Because over on the other side, people, he still was a man who had incredible fire and force that had at the center of it an idea of change that was change along class and color lines, and immediately people saw that as threatening. And this is all before the Cuban Revolution, which makes it even more fascinating. And this is all before Castro emerges. Here is one of the first kind of moments when somewhere close to the United States, close to Cuba as well, you have a radical leader who comes in, even if he's saying to the United States, no, I'm not going to jeopardize your role in these affairs. It still wasn't enough. The day after, I have this in the book, the day after Fignolé's inauguration as provisional president, there was a meeting that was held in Washington with Richard Nixon present at that meeting, saying, what are we going to do about this?
Dr. Smith, Ron Garcia, I'm also a member of the student cohort under Dr. Brenner. Your text is mostly political discourse, but something that I saw a common thread, whether it be the Marxist Jacques Roumain or Duvalier, was this search for an authentic culture and this vibrancy of discourse, of intellectual poetry, art. I know that you are involved with archaeology, and Roumain was interested in anthropology. Where does that fit into this discourse, this search for authentic culture in Haiti? And I wonder if you could elaborate perhaps on that.
Okay, sure. That search for the authentic culture predates the occupation, the post-occupation period. It becomes very vibrant in the 1920s. And one thing to bear in mind is that a lot of these political figures that I write about in the book were people who had their political ideas shaped in the 1920s, which was a strongly culturally nationalistic period. Right? These are people who were very concerned with reclaiming or recognizing more appropriately Haitian culture, right? People like Jean-Paul Mas and the indigenous movement and so on. And that remains a common thread throughout their ideas. So even though that, and it was an inspiration too for Duvalier, it was one of the launch pads for Duvalier and the early Noirs, the griots as they were called at the time, the issue of Haitian culture, and preserving, documenting, writing, and expressing that, celebrating that was very important. And that flows into political ideologies. But even as those political ideas develop, that central root of their kind of radicalism, to use that word very broadly here, remained, which is this idea of culture, and culture being important. And so when 1946 happens, that's very central. It's also a cultural explosion as much as it is a political explosion, right? And this is sort of what Estimate recognized with the bicentenary, right? That here's a culture that we can express, that we can put forward. But it fed into ideas of authenticity, the idea of what is true Haitian culture, who is a true Haitian too, which was often a self-serving political device that was used at the time. But that becomes very important throughout. Right? The cultural discourse is still very much present there.
I could have a follow-up question.
Sure.
One of the wonderful things that I find about this text is it reveals not only your passion for politics, but also you demonstrate your passion for music. And I'll use this as a moment to interject that you also had this world music program in Jamaica, which heavily featured classic as well as more contemporary Haitian music. And many people knew you actually as DJ Smith. Right? So music emerges also in the narrative, and I talk to us about how and why you folded music.
The short answer is that, and this is the honest answer, I think coming from Jamaica, where music is so critical to politics, to life, and going to Haiti and seeing the same thing in contemporary Haiti, it seemed impossible to imagine an era when that didn't happen. You know, to just simply talk about the political aspects of it and not see how the music folded into that. And you know, I've shared this with Chantal and I share it with everyone. I mean, I found that too, doing the research and conducting interviews, music was often an opening, so to speak. Certain people I would interview and I talk to them about, you know, the labor issues and what was the mob like and how were things organized in the party and who was in charge of everything. People would say to me, yeah, you know, we used to have parties. We used to have bands, jazz that would come by and play, and that was great. You know, that's important. It's a kind of bonding experience for many people, and that's why I draw references in the text to songs that were produced during the period, and then the lyrics of those songs as kinds of reflections on a kind of popular consciousness and how this movement, which in many ways, as I said earlier in my presentation, begins as a kind of elite-led movement, becomes more widespread, and that's one way it happens. I'll give an interesting story of how music figures into that. This is not in the book, but it's something I found. As part of the research, I interviewed a band leader, because it was very important to find out what the music scene was like to me during that period. Issa El-Saidi, no longer with us, but some may recognize him as one of the main band leaders. And he told me that when he used to play in nightclubs in Pétionville during the 1950s, when Magua would enter those nightclubs, he would tell the band to play the song Me Diabla. Here comes the instrumental. See, that shows it's subtle in some ways. He says sometimes Magua would pick up on it and give him a wink because he understands the meaning of it. But yeah, it's a critical part of all of this.
One more. By the way, Meadow Charlemagne is at Tap Tap on Thursday night.
Okay.
What does CLR James have to say about 46?
It's interesting. CLR James wasn't really writing that much about it. What you find during the period James is writing is that James, as well as many other Anglophone radical intellectuals, are becoming very much involved in the Haitian Revolution and what the Haitian Revolution means. And it's not James alone, there are others who are doing that. So and that's a tendency actually that runs in some ways in scholarship to kind of go back to the Haitian Revolution and to hold that as the kind of beacon for proof of black progress, of independence, of anti-colonialism and all that. So that's really where he was kind of pushing a lot of his interest in Haiti. I've not come across any writings he made of this period.
He was in the United States, I believe, in 46. But very involved in left politics.
He was, that's true. That's true. And I suspect he may have met some of the Haitian exiles who were here as well at some point. But you know, what's interesting too is even those communists in Cuba during this period, like the Cuban Socialist Party, were very skeptical initially at the Haitian leftists because they wanted to see just how strong these groups were, right? And until they seemed strong enough and could emerge, there wasn't really any, at least from what I've detected, any conscious kind of linking or connecting with them. And James might be in a similar kind of group. Yes. Okay.
Disclaimer.
Also very important in terms of the cultural question. The indigenous movement, which I mentioned before, which was celebrating Haitian culture, which was celebrated essentially voodoo culture in Haiti. It has been linked to folk culture in Haiti. And that too continues. So people like Jacques Firmin, who was communist, being communist, being very kind of non-religious in his outlook, still invested a great deal of time in collecting voodoo artifacts. It's been important, and ethnography and so on has been important to claim that. That's a short answer to it. And there are people I know in the room more and more experts on that part of it. But even the folklore celebrations, like the bicentenary and so on, use voodoo, but in a kind of commercialized way to a certain degree, that we see elsewhere in the Caribbean, like using it to folk culture and putting it as a selling point.
Well, thank you everyone for your questions.
Thanks.
Before we close this event and get to have a little bit more private and informal time, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone that came out tonight. In the beginning, I was a little bit worried, I was a little bit nervous what our turnout would be. And as the day got closer, I was more and more confident that we were going to have a good crowd. But I had no idea that we would be, I won't say standing room only, but I will almost say standing room only. So thank you
There's
so
a whole bunch of people on the other side
for coming out. Thank you to Dr. Vernon, Dr. Smith for presenting this wonderful lecture for us today. Thank you to the folks at the Haitian Heritage Museum who have been such wonderful hosts. And I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your evening and eat up because I brought way too much food. Thank you. As you mentioned at the beginning of the night, there are books for sale on the other side of the wall, and we will be doing a book signing up here. So if you guys should purchase your books, if you'd like to get them signed, please come back up.